Hi.
How are you?
I think we're already live. I think it's time. So hi, Carlo. Really
Hi.
nice to have you here. So from where are you joining?
Hey, Roger. Good to see you again. I'm calling from Chatsworth, California, which is about 30 miles outside of Los Angeles.
So it's like 11 o'clock in the morning for you. It's 8 o'clock in the evening here in Switzerland. So really nice that we can make this happen so easily. So really great. I'm really excited about this session because we've talked like a few weeks ago, and just wanted to give a little bit of background why we're talking. And so basically, I was looking on LinkedIn, and there was this post about ringDNA rebrand, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I was checking it out and learned about you. And maybe you can give the audience just a little bit of background on who you are.
Yeah, so Carlo Espiritu, I'm the creative director at ringDNA, and I head the product and brand design teams there. And ringDNA is a revenue acceleration platform that essentially helps guide enterprise sales organizations to be more effective, be more productive, and ultimately build better experiences for their customers. And yeah, when I posted that, that was about a month and a half ago, and that was sort of my self-reflecting on the recent brand refresh.
And then I actually found out in our conversation that the rebrand did happen like 2 years ago. So it was actually not too fresh. So what's about this? Why did you? And why this? I mean, you got quite some buzz with it, right?
Yeah, I think like what happens is like, at least specifically for the last 7-8 years, where I've aligned as like a 0 to 1 designer to help pre-seed Series A, Series B companies, build design leadership, rebuild their brand, work with the product designers on product vision. That's where I sort of have an impact to build these systems using brand archetypes as an example, to try to forge a path for where this company is going to go. And sometimes in a rush and trying to keep up pace with the rapid growth of a company, you just don't get to make the big splash that more traditional big agencies do when they are working closely hand in hand with a new company.
Yeah, and I think it's actually pretty impressive. You told me that, I mean, how many designers have worked on this rebrand?
So when I started, it was myself, and we had another designer who is more UI UX focused. But the actual functional aspect of designing it, that started with me, and now I have obviously tremendous help from a senior designer and a senior brand designer who obviously I'll thank later.
Yeah, cool. So before we dive into the topic, because everyone is probably curious what it is all about, there's just like, I'm going to post a little link in the chat, which is this site here, which is about the ringDNA brand itself, which just gives you a little bit of an overview on the whole rebrand material. And I think you can always have a look on what the end result is. But today, it's not really about that, but it's about a concept that you use to actually create the rebrand. And we get into that in a second. So I will post the link in the chat. I hope this works. It should come in now. Hopefully, I'm just checking that this is working. Yeah, should be the case. Perfect. So, okay, cool. So, and because today it's all about something called brand archetypes, and this is, I would call it a methodology to do brand strategy and also create visual direction. And it's actually, I didn't really know the concept before, so it was kind of cool to get a really raw insight into the concept from you last time we spoke, and that was so exciting that I thought that's really, really cool to show to a larger audience. And so I think before we go into that, maybe you can give us a very brief overview on brand archetypes. What is this?
Yes. Yeah, it's very fascinating because I actually, from my background, I got into filmmaking. I was always kind of, enamored with storytelling and narratives and the power that they have. And working in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, you start to learn about how formula plays a role in script writing and so forth. And around when I first started in the industry as someone who wrote coverage, basically, breaking down narratives to their essence to recommend executives if a story is good or not. That's around the time I got introduced to the work of Margaret Mark and Carol Pearson. And The Hero and the Outlaw came around the time, this is like over 2 decades ago. But that was something that I
So
read.
it's a pretty old concept, though.
Yeah, I mean, these women learning from Carl Jung's work, and obviously Carl Jung learning from Plato, kind of built and forged this path that myself and others have had access to, and kind of facilitate their own understanding and their own workshops in various ways. And for me, it just happens that I've sort of found a niche where it is a very critical aspect of when I do rebrands, but it is part of a larger sort of workshop format that is kind of like the linchpin to everything.
So that's really cool. And because we are now just talking about it, I think it's, we said we're going to just dive in and, explore all of it, because it's much more exciting if you can see these things. So we've prepared, or basically you've prepared, a nice Figma file, which we'll share with you as well in the chat, which I do now, where you can actually also follow directly in the Figma file when Carlo is talking about the topics, and you can dive in directly. So let's get this started, Carlo. What are we seeing here?
Yeah, so I wanted to just, ultimately this, Figma file represents a largely untouched documentation of the brand archetype portion of the workshops that I, facilitated at ringDNA. And this cover page was just my attempt at basically reducing these concepts to their essence. And, you can go through a Google search and look up archetypes. There's a lot of different, meaning to all of this. In some cases, there's even different names for them. But these are the ones that I've been using for quite some time now, that I've learned from my own mentors. And essentially, like, these visuals simplify kind of like these larger concepts. And to me, I think setting the stage that we are here to get to the essence, to the core of what we want to be and who we aspire to be, that's most important. And this kind of represents that in like its simplest form.
And these symbols, did you come up with them, or is that something that you found somewhere?
I did. I generally gravitate towards a more minimalistic approach in how to, simplify complex things. And actually looking at this now, when you think about hero, right, it's obviously a crest for Superman. But when you think about that, when you think about diamond shape and you really read into it, how did diamonds get made, right? A lot of pressure. And I think that is what a hero's also kind of about. Like, they rise to the occasion.
That's a nice one. I actually first saw a diamond. It's interesting, but didn't really see the Superman first, but it's great. Yeah, amazing.
And I'll just go around here. So I think like the ideal state, and to me, what success looks like for, doing a refresh for an organization like ringDNA is, there's going to be that visual expression, the identity system that is going to help us tell our story. But I think internally, the undertaking, of course, to get into a brand refresh is all about finding focus, building consistency, signaling change internally and externally to our customers, but also creating brand awareness. But none of that happens without everyone aligned internally. And, when I facilitated this, there were about, I think I was like number 17 employee. We've grown rapidly to over 100 employees now. And I think thinking about brand in this concept that, sure, a designer might
now you see some visitors here in the file, so don't be confused.
Yeah, no problem. It's great. And this is just like a sort of like how I envision like brands get better and build that consistency is shared ownership of the brand.
And I think that's really crucial. I mean, cannot double down on that more. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it's still like it's not in practice, right? It's not easy to get that alignment.
Understanding the brand archetypes definitely drives that internal alignment. And I think you'll get to see how that kind of manifests itself as I go through these slides or these frames. But one thing I wanted to emphasize that I jotted down here for today was the way I structure these workshops is, coming in new to this company, it's all about building trust. I've only been in this company for a month at this time. I don't know the sales space. So I have done some audit, some research, looked at the data that we have, but I've kept myself pretty naive because to me, I want to be as empathetic as possible to a pretty, large undertaking, and going through a brand refresh isn't easy, as you might know.
Yeah, we do.
Business, right? So like, for me, it's like, how do I structure a workshop so it gives me credibility, but also builds trust? And ultimately, everyone becomes a builder and a designer in this process. So roughly, brand archetypes to me is structured as a bookend to this entire workshop. So obviously through a series of them, it's structured first and foremost around play. So how do we use our instincts and our visceral reaction to things? Because ultimately that's sort of the promise of archetypes, right? That you can tap into the subconscious, and hopefully, when you can key in on those qualities, that is how you can build that loyalty and trust with your customers. And imagination is sort of like the middle section of this. And it's all about focusing on areas of white spaces where a company can get a competitive advantage. So this is where I look at competitive matrices. This is where I look at Google Design Sprint ideas around projection, year 5, year 10, where do you want to be? And then lastly, empathy, it's like, how do you walk in someone else's shoe? And I think that's where the brand archetype really reveals its power, and where you can be rational and thoughtful about aligning to some of those core ideas.
That's super easy. So the gut feeling thing is interesting. So it's really about, you try to force people to react instinctively. And you don't want them to think about it like for a day. You don't want to give that out and tell like everyone, look at this, and then tomorrow give me an answer. You really want to force people to give you the gut feeling. So I think that's a very important piece of it.
Yeah, and in observing people's actions in these workshops, that's part of the research, right? Is qualitatively, how do they respond? And one of the things I like to do is, when I start with this in terms of play, I create these mood boards. There's 12 of them. And really the ask for the group is, what's your response to this? What do you like? What don't you like? And then we'll have a discussion on why they made those choices. And for me as a designer that eventually has to actually design, this works on multiple levels. One, it allows me to bring my world into theirs and to show kind of what's trending in the design space. But it also helps me uncover their tolerance, their open-mindedness to how design looks today versus yesterday, and how design can be forward.
So important piece that you add here is like, so you're saying, did you record these sessions so that you had time to then reveal certain things, what people said about it, or how did you do that? How do you keep track?
This is all raw in the real time. Just as if I was showing this to you and our audience, I would just say like, here's one board, here's another one. And then you could see some of the sticky dots from our own workshops.
So these are people actually.
These are actual people. And like I said, I didn't change much of this at all. I was just, going through the exercise as I am right now, showing like what people said, and I don't know exactly who said this or that, but at this time, but you can see where kind of like people are putting sticky notes and their dots preference. And obviously green is great, yellow is kind of neutral, red is no. And then you start to see a series of these. And one of the things that's important, as a designer in creating mood boards like this is not only bringing them into your world, but there is a strategy and a craft to building these mood boards, because as I zoom out to these 12, you quickly see something very similar happening. One, it's like the way that everything is sort of arranged, right? There's an image example. There's an image of a DNA. Of course, our name is ringDNA. We have equity there.
It's obvious, yeah.
I had to play in that space. So there's a representation of DNA. There's like, a slogan or some kind of language that speaks to something, outdoor campaign, iconography usage, a product image, a banner ad. So all of these things are meant to, subconsciously start telling people like, these are the things that we're eventually going to make once we uncover strategically who we are. But we can't get there until we go through this exercise of just, let's trust our gut. And obviously there's other exercise prior to this. Like, you have 3 minutes to jot on a Post-it, like what you think ringDNA means to you. So, and then, comparing that with the more quantitative data, when I'm reviewing a bunch of different reviews across the internet of how customers perceive us. So there's a lot at play, but this is trying to get underneath all of this.
And so what you're saying is that like all of these mood boards kind of follow the same structure. So actually you take the same structure and you have the same objects or kind of representations, and then you just try to bring in different kinds of style, but all follow the same pattern. And even though they look completely different, but they all follow the same structure to let you actually do some analysis on it.
Yeah, and I think the big reveal and the part that I get excited about, that people get excited about, is actually, after going through this, at the end of the exercise, remember, if I go back to the structure, this is part of play. By the time we get to empathy, I really want them to be rational and thoughtful. And then that's when I introduce the concept of actual archetypes and the 12 archetypes that exist based on the work of Margaret Mark, Carol Pearson, and others. And there's no surprise why there are 12 mood boards, because here they're kind of just tapping into their instinct. I like this, I like that, I like this color, I don't like this color. But each one is directly mapped to one of the 12. And in the best case scenario, when you do have a team, when you do have members of a team that really understand who they are and where they want to go, there is alignment around their subjective choices here and their rational choices when you go deeper into specific archetypes.
So to unwrap that again, maybe clarify. So what you're saying is that if you look at maybe the first mood board again, and you look at that DNA thing, so this is bound to one of the archetypes.
Correct.
In that sense. And then you unwrap everything in the end, and you put those dots to those places and kind of discover those patterns.
Yeah, and again, like the beauty of this is like, even though these dots represent what things are not like or what things were.
There's a lot of red in that one, huh? So what happened here?
Exactly. I think it's just like, a little too tame. And like, if you look at this, so for the purposes of today, I mapped it directly with the first one here, and it's the caregiver archetype. And these are things that represent what a caregiver is. So are we that brand? Obviously, in hindsight, we aren't this type of brand. There are elements of our brand that do this stuff, but ultimately, I think one of the things that you'll find is when you study brand archetypes is often they say that choosing one archetype, it breeds more focus. But I think, to me, especially in the way that brands are being built and having to be more adaptable to change and constant change today, there are ways to incorporate nuances across multiple archetypes.
So you don't choose just one in the end. So you create basically a combination of 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I think for us, and that's the beauty of these workshops, is there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of opinions to consider, and really thoughtful ideas, and where we land at. And again, these can be easily found. These are my interpretation of them, and these are how I constructed them. But when I get to later, I'll show where we landed at, and also how that kind of dovetailed into what you were initially showing as the eventual output. But when I first showcased this to the team, I like to leave sort of more established brands that more or less have kind of owned this kind of archetype, more or less. But then I like to include new ones that are up for debate, because Dropbox, you're like, what's it doing as a creator archetype? Well, I think before they were more utilitarian, send a file here, house a file here. But I think the work that Collins did to tap into that business opportunity of, a lot of creatives using that tool, it was all about unleashing your creative energy. And I think that's sort of where their business is now. And you look at some of these, they're very, very obvious, right? And then you can see some of the dots gravitating here. And, if I zoom back out, when you go back here, doesn't this feel somewhat heroic, bold, sort of, gravitas, if you will? And then you can kind of see how the heat map looks like here. So
did people notice when you show it to them, like when you show them these mood boards, do they get the trick? It's like
it's really hard to do it unless you're really aware of this, because, for instance, part of doing these exercises too is like how you design your space where you're facilitating it. So they're on completely opposite sides of the room. You wouldn't be able to put them side by side. And they're randomized. So you couldn't really draw that connection until after the fact. But that is the beauty of archetypes in general, because even if you don't know the 12, somehow, some way, over time, through stories that we've been told, they're already part of our subconscious.
But you're showing them, if you do this offline, you would show them like as mood boards, and within that mood board they have to choose, and you don't just randomly place every picture somewhere else and let them choose just their favorites randomly. You group them in those mood boards.
I group them afterwards, but in real time, Justin, I had them trust their gut and make really quick choices here. And I think maybe this section was maybe spend 15 minutes, maybe 10. I think this is more around like using up that last hour or a part of an hour to really read this thoroughly and then make a choice. And then, we had follow-up conversations like, who are we then? Because it seems like we gravitated towards this and something else. And I think when we get down to it as a company, ultimately, when you look at all of these different archetypes, by the time we had a discussion, how did we land at hero and sage? Because it seems like they're completely opposite personalities. But again, when you look through time, the relationship between hero and sage is super powerful. You think about Batman and Alfred the Butler being his conscience, his moral compass. That is so relevant to our industry and our business, because the way we look at it is our product and our tools and our philosophy and the way we think about sales at ringDNA, we're sort of the sage to give guidance. And in doing so, we create heroes, not only in our organizations, in how we deliver both guidance and success for customers, but our customers as well. They become heroes for their own customers.
How did the competitive landscape play a role in that? Do you look at that from the beginning to see like how which kind of archetypes are they? And then you realize we are the same, so do we have to add a unique angle to it, or how do you bring that element in the whole game?
It is part of my own early homework when I've first onboarded, is to understand what the other competitors are doing and how do we have an opportunity there. And, thankfully in our space, it is growing massively. It is very niche, but the opportunity to bring very thoughtful design exercises like this is relatively new, I would say, like in the same way that innovation and design has sort of brought new ideas to fintech space, health, and so forth. So I think for us, it was really clear who we wanted to be and really just doubling down on these concepts and using this as our guiding principle really helped us differentiate, even just thinking about how we use color systematically inside our organization.
Mm-hmm. Really, really interesting. And if you go back maybe a second to one of the archetypes, so we see all of these things. So did you come up with them by yourself, or did you use did you add some nuances there, here and there, to adapt, or are they like pretty much like in the standard model?
They're pretty standard in their model, and I think what I referenced was I like to add some of the more newer brands here that are up for debate. And another interesting thing is, like, in some cases, entertainer will be called like a joker or prankster and things like that. But to me, like for facilitating this workshop, I like to pit Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They're constantly brands that are always trying to be competitive with one another. And I think if you think about it, who are the types of spokespeople that represent Coca-Cola? You have Santa Claus on their Coke cans. When you watch like a film at the beginning, their ads it's all about personifying like these colorful red dots in a utopian world. But if you think about Pepsi, you even go back to the 80s, you have Michael Jackson as someone who represents the brand. You have Beyonce now representing the brand. So I think it just gives you a really good point of comparison on how these brands work and how they've been able to tap into this. And then like you have someone like Apple, like I think I Googled this recently, like where some people in their own archetype exercises put Apple. They have them like in magician, for example, or creator. And like, I think it's great for debate, because for me, if I think of Apple as the think different company, to me, they're still the Maverick, right? Like smashing that glass. But as they evolved over time, you have like an outsized personality, a representative of the brand, like the late Steve Jobs, who is sort of like a magician in how he reveals like the new iPhone, right? So it's really
interesting. It's super interesting that you can actually play with that. And yeah, there is probably not that real truth, but it's good to talk about it, because as you said, if you put something that is more debatable, you can start, considering that same debate for your own brand, and maybe, discover some new angles that you might not have been so obvious.
Exactly. And I think at its core, you want to not only get to people's sort of passions and their instinctive responses, but you want openness. And I feel like the more open and the more we treat this with a lot of candor, we can really get to great ideas. And it really makes the execution easily for me, at least as a designer.
And so, because we already used quite some time, but let's use the last 5 minutes maybe. How you now got to this definition for your archetype at ringDNA. How did you then move that into your final design and your final, your brand visual design?
Yeah, so I think like the easy part was trying to understand like what hero and sage looks like, right? And at least as a guiding principle, I have sort of the mood boards to guide me there. But I think like as a designer, you want to, when you're building a brand identity system, you want to think about like, well, hero and sage, I've already said that they have a really interesting dynamic, and the relationship between a hero and a sage is akin to someone that is selling to someone else in the world of sales. And I think ultimately what that comes down to is creating a connection. And for me, when I think back, like, what is it that our business promises? What are the core concepts that are true? And for me, in creating the identity that you shared earlier, I think like the crux of that is that it's centered around data, conversations, and people. And how do we make meaning out of that? And I think like if you go to share sort of that case study, I can walk through that really quickly.
Yeah, just a second. I'll just bring it up. Yep. Just give me a second. I'm right there. Here we go. There it is. You just let me know where I should go. So I can
just scroll down a little bit. You could see it in motion.
Really nice.
Those are just concepts of how the brand becomes all of these other things around delivering revenue for customers. But if you scroll down a little bit, there's like a little framework that I use to get to where I was at. So when we think about Hero and Sage, it's sort of like this relationship, a transfer of information. And then on the back side of that, in the back end, there's obviously data being, extracted and how we deliver insights from that data. But I think ultimately in sales, business to business communication between two people, that conversation is a cornerstone for building rapport, building relationship. And it isn't so much about like outwardly selling to people, but the more helpful you can be as a sage, the more opportunities you can become a hero and also make that person feel like a hero. And to me, like once I thought about this, what are the things around the history of time? And again, when we think about brand archetypes, right, it's sort of how do you get into like the subconscious of things? To me, like the best of branding and identities that are really powerful are ones that show you something familiar in a new way. So with this framework, I did research and, what are things that ladder up to that? And I thought about Morse code really deeply. It's like the ability to communicate with someone through technology and using that as sort of a way that, we can build a system around ringDNA, the combination of DNA sequences as a way to unlock unlock life essentially. And the way we think about it is, when we look at audio files, for example, in our conversation AI tool, it's like you're looking at the building blocks of great conversations, is how you extract insights as a company and to deliver action for people.
I really like that. It's really nice if you think about it a bit more to create that connection, and it just makes all of it more meaningful.
Yep.
And did you wanted me to show like more something specific here?
Yeah, I think like even if you look at our product names, they're very much centered around helpfulness and guidance. And this is our color, like I think when we think about hero and being bold, one of the areas of opportunity that I saw clearly in our space, and this happens a lot in B2B SaaS companies, is it's dominated by a lot of blue. And obviously we are a shade of blue to an extent, but owning a broad color spectrum allows us to really infuse the ideas around that color across our organization. So if you scroll down, this Morse code translates by color to how we think about, our teams internally. And if you scroll down further, you can you can see how we use the Morse code to extend to our customers. So we can now customize Morse code to represent your initials. We used it in our offices pre-COVID to represent, conversationalists that are important to us. And you'll see some of them here.
It's so powerful. Yeah, it's great.
Here are the teams. Here's some of our office spaces: Socrates, Morse, Freud, Pat Summit, a great coach, Carl Jung, John Wooden. So really it's just trying to figure out like what those relationships mean and how we can double down on them.
It's a lot of stuff. So you actually did some amazing work. How long did it
And
take
actually,
you to do that?
the basic toolkit was probably from the workshop to the basic toolkit, which obviously this represents more than the toolkit. I got to in about 2 months, I would say 2.5 months. But all of this that you're seeing now is thanks to my team that I have today. So my senior brand designer, Hazel Chung, was my first hire, who helped extend the toolkit to our brand guidelines and has developed our illustration styles. So the illustration that you passed, we actually have even updated that since as recently as this past year. More again centered around the successful outcome of feeling like a hero. And then a lot of the product work, I have to give thanks to my colleague Manuel, who obviously has been part of the ringDNA organization for a long time, and also my senior product designer, Catherine Santoso, who's been a big lift on thinking about how we can innovate in our product. And obviously there's this cross-functional team has enabled us to move really quickly and create a lot of things, because that internal alignment cross-functionally is really strong in our organization.
And what was in the end when you were finished? How did the team perceive like the rebrand? What was the reaction? How would you consider like their, were they fully amazed, or what was their reaction on the rebrand?
In the oversimplistic sense, I guess till this day, part of our swag is still very popular. You don't really have to convince people to wear it. They love to wear our swag proudly. But I would say like internally, it's been well received. I think because people can understand conceptually the thoughtfulness that not only myself, but largely the team that was responsible for bringing it to life over time and really taking care of it. Like one of the most common Slack emojis that we use is our ringDNA symbol. If that
Yeah.
for anything, But
Do
I think
you have an animated one or just a static one?
Just a static one.
That's next level stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really great. And so what's next? What's next for the brand? Are you fully happy with the result and you're done? Or what's next?
Yeah, the beauty is you're never done. And I think like that's, for me, I never get too attached to these concepts. That's why, like I said, in December, we redid our illustrations. A lot of these things that are visual, we're constantly iterating and learning. But even our positioning and our values, they're always worth revisiting, because when I started and I did the facilitation, we were such a different company than we are now. And I think the more we've spent time with the brand, we've seen like how we can double down on certain areas and maybe not use other areas. So there's still a lot of opportunity. And it's, like I said, it's never finished, which is great.
And I think you, in that high growth environment, which we are also in, it's just not, I mean, it's necessary, because you're evolving as a culture, you're evolving as a brand so quickly that you're not like around for 10, 20 years. So you have to adapt on your way. And I think, so you have to have a bit shorter iterations and shorter cycles to actually look at it. And I think that's extremely important. So I think we're already running out of time, but I wanted to ask you maybe some few last questions. So first of all, which brand do you admire the most?
Easy one for me, because I've admired them for quite a bit of time. And like, obviously, maybe it's obvious to people, but Nike to me is just one of those brands that is always kind of the head of the game in social issues. They make really, at the time, controversial bets, but they prove out that, aside from being a sneaker company, that the idea of community is sort of what's propelling their growth going forward. So I still admire them quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's one that you hear very often, but I think it's so many angles to it, and it's definitely a very, one of the best brands in the world. So probably to end this conversation, what else do you want to say to the audience or share? I don't know. Is there something that you wanted to add to all of this?
Yeah, so from day one, I've had the utmost respect and support from my own internal team, and especially the executive team. You know, our CEO, Howard Brown, he brought me into the organization to, you know, sort of reimagine all of this. So without his, you know, thoughtfulness, his work, and along with my VP of product, Jeff Shelton, bringing me on board, you know, none of this would have been possible. And I think they've given me the space to grow, and I'm really thankful for that. And I'm thankful for my designers that I've already mentioned. And, you know, I would just say, if you want to be part of the team, you want to join me, learn from me, I'd love to learn from you, because I'm also hiring designers across product and brand. And, you know, you could learn more about the specific design team at ringDNA.design. But if you want to learn about our organization and our products, especially if you're in sales or marketing organizations and roles, we're at ringdna.com.
Really great. Carlo, thanks so much. I think that was extremely insightful. I still like, I love the topic. I think unfortunately, we haven't done the exact same exercise internally, which I hopefully will do one day very soon. And I think it was really, really cool to see like this in combination with actual application. So I hope everyone seeing this gets a little bit of inspiration. And I think it's never too early to do that, actually. I think you should start with this stuff like on day one. And I think this is a very nice framework that you just shared with us. And thank you very much for joining. And I think I heard that we shared the Figma file as well. I'm not sure if we provide it then later as well somewhere to download. But really, thank you very much. Here we also have some comments from the audience. Thanks so much for sharing from Marge. So really, thank you very much again for joining. And I wish you all the best with ringDNA and hopefully your next evolution of the brand. And yeah, talk soon. It was a pleasure. Roger. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Thank you, everyone.
And bye-bye, everyone. Bye.